Welcome to a brand new segment of the Different Theories show, and we're naming this brand new section, If I Was Kevin Feige. As the name can tell you, we'll be going into the mindset of Marvel Studios producers and CEOs, and each episode of this new series will read a comic book from Marvel Comics, and then we will adapt it into a screenplay or a story pitch idea, and then create our own versions of the MCU. Of course, potential spoilers for Loki if we are a little accurate on our made-up story here, but the accuracy will be thrown out of the window for this series, as our sole purpose is to create a story that we all like. So how this will go is that we'll first go over the comic book storyline that we read. We'll talk about why we pitched this idea and why we decided to adapt this into an MCU movie. Then we'll go over some of the plot points of the movie, the main story, and then we'll talk about who we will cast in this whole movie, which will be super, super fun. So everyone, please strap in and welcome back to another episode of we have decided to read one of the most popular Loki series, Loki, Agent of Asgard, from 2014 to 2015, and adapt it into our own version of a Loki movie. So first of all, Olivia, as our comic book expert, would you run us down on what happened in the comic series?
We start off with a sacrifice, one made by the trickster god Loki during the 2010 Siege of Asgard storyline. This version of Loki gives his life to the Void to save the universe from a problem he partially helped create. Never one to be outdone by something as trite as death, Loki is eventually reincarnated into a young boy. With no memory of his prior self, the boy is accompanied only by a mysterious magpie named Ewing. Though shunned by much of Asgardia, Kid Loki goes on to use his mischievous tricks for good, determined to forge a path as his own person. Unfortunately, Ewing is eventually revealed to be an echo of the prior Loki's spirit. This spirit murders his innocent reincarnate soul, taking Kid Loki's body and effectively co-opting his new and improved reputation. Ultimately, this Loki goes to his mother, Freyja, and becomes an agent of Asgard, essentially someone who does the realm's dirty work to atone for his previous sins. Now, a new Loki, one from the distant future, enters the scene. This sinister King Loki, or Old Loki, has traveled back in time to ensure that his future will come to pass. In yet another tragic turn of events, it is later revealed that despite his aspirations to change, the missions Loki's mother has sent him on have all been in service of ensuring a future where he becomes the evil old King Loki. Despite this, Loki refuses to be the god of lies and evil others so badly want him to be. After realizing the true nature of a lie, Loki decides to change just one more time and become the god of stories.
So to my fellow Marvel Studios producers, I want to ask, why do you think that this is a story worth adapting into the next entry of the MCU?
Honestly, I think the reason this story sticks out to me in particular is because it's such a different side to the Loki that everybody obviously knows and loves from the MCU. And obviously a lot of the dynamics with the gods and Asgard are different between the comics and the MCU, but I think the most interesting thing about this series is it explores all these meta concepts of like what is self and what is change, and it sees Loki trying to change into a better person and sort of tries to redefine what that means. So I think it'd be a really interesting entry into what we know so far from MCU Loki.
Oh yeah, it's really it's kind of like a bit of kind of an attempt at like a redemption story with Loki, which I find really interesting. And I also really liked in the one thing that really stood out to me is I think her name was Verity, the one that can like tell whether someone is lying or not, and like her relationship with Loki. It was more of like a human side that I hadn't seen before, and I thought that was super interesting how he befriended just the human from Earth. So I don't know, it was a side of Loki that I'd never seen before in the movies. I think it would be interesting to kind of bring that out.
Yeah, I agree, Sofia. Loki in the MCU is such a like lovable character by sort of, the present in the MCU. And this showed us a lot of sides of him this story shows us a lot of sides of him that we haven't seen. I think the part that is really compelling as a film is the fact that he's trying to atone for his past sins and write a new future for himself. What I like about that is it sort of parallels what the MCU is doing with the original Marvel universe. The old Marvel comics made lots of mistakes, sometimes really terrible mistakes. And it's sort of remarkable. And even the early days of the MCU, the stories were, not super inclusive, not super diverse. And you see the MCU growing into a more interesting and complex universe over time. I think the MCU is wrestling with the source material's past mistakes, trying to make good. And so I really like this as sort of a meta study of how do you take a character that has pros and cons and address those flaws later on and try to be better. It's perfect material for an MCU film in my book.
Agree with all of the aforementioned points. And I think one of the important parts is the mix of genre present in this comic book that we have never seen before in the MCU. It's like a mix of spy movies and a fantasy movie. And it's very rare where you see a combination of both, where you have like a 007 movie, but it's very fantastical. And I think an Agent of Asgard movie can really do a good job bringing that new blending in of genre. And as we know, the previous MCU movies have done really well blending in different genres that people like into sort of new genres that really flourish in their own merit. So I think Loki, Agent of Asgard is a much needed story of Loki that brings in a lot of new perspectives to his character, but also to filmmaking and to the MCU that we can bring to the table. So these are very compelling reasons to start this story. So I wanted to briefly talk about some of our story ideas. So I have a bare bones story that I have with me right now. There are a lot of elements from the comic book that I do not know how to adapt into a movie. And also there are a lot of elements that I wrote it in about like 10 minutes. This is really immediate reaction after reading the comics. And I was like, this is probably a little shaky. So I'll talk about the bare bones story first. We can add on or take out anything, and then people can compare and share notes. So some of the rules for creating the story. The first rule is it cannot really break MCU continuity unless it makes sense, unless we do a retcon that makes sense. So for example, we can't just say, oh, Obadiah Stane was alive all along, unless we provide a reason for why he was alive all along. Second, because this movie will most likely involve alternate reality and time travel, we're going to be a little bit loose in terms of enforcing the MCU's time travel rules, because as we've seen from Endgame, there's not really a rule where they can agree upon themselves either. So I think that with time travel, as long as it's not too out there, I think we can probably do whatever we want. So we're continuing with the exact same story with Endgame. So still the 2012 version of Loki. And this movie will begin with 2012 scene in Endgame where Loki escapes with a Tesseract. And the first thing that he does when he is to travel back to Asgard to take revenge, because by that time Loki thinks Asgard has wronged him. But then he discovers that due to a butterfly effect with the multiverse in Endgame, Asgard has actually transformed into something else. Odin's no longer the ruler, is no longer what he thinks he is. And this Asgard seems a little more chaotic because the people here truly respect Loki and actually treat him as a hero, which is something that Loki has always wanted. So Asgard tells Loki that, okay, the times have changed and they want to recruit Loki as an agent of Asgard and make him an Asgardian hero. And Loki agrees to that. So Asgard assigns two characters, Lorelei and the Enchantress, to accompany Loki on his missions. And these people have their own agendas. We'll see later on Asgard's kind of having their own plan behind the scenes. And Enchantress throughout the missions will try to seduce Loki and subliminally send him messages to make him turn. And also this will see an introduction of the TVA. And these TVA people, they really like order in their timelines, and they caught wind of Loki when he escaped with the Tesseract, breaking the timeline, which is very similar to the premise of the TV series. And they're trying to investigate what exactly Loki is up to. Asgard has actually acquired the time-traveling device from Endgame through these multiverse travels and tells Loki to use them to travel to different realities. So Loki's mission here is to go to different timelines and make minor changes. So Loki, being of course the god of mischief, gladly agrees to do this. And since secretly Loki also wants recognition as a hero, and he just also wants to take revenge on the different realities that he thinks has wronged him, so that's why he accepts this mission. So the first half, our act 2, is Loki goes to different timelines and points of history to do different missions. This is kind of like a blend of Mission Impossible, but with a lot of sci-fi and fantastical elements. So he's changing both real world and MCU events, so we'll see a lot of surprise cameos and characters appearing in this section of the movie. But also the TVA sends a team of agents after Loki because they think that something is wrong across the timelines to pursue him. So you see kind of Loki still being a little villainous here in the first half, trying to escape from Asgard. But then on Asgard, old Loki, who the comic books have called Eiko, appears. And as it turns out, Asgard is also assigning him, as well as some other versions of Loki across the multiverse, as agents of Asgard to really mess with timelines. Old Loki's willing to do this because in his future, Asgard promises the desolate realm just for him to be king. So he has become so twisted. He's like, you know what? Any chance that I can be king, I'll take it. So kind of like that comic book storyline. So on one of Loki's missions, this is the middle point of the story, Loki encounters Lady Loki and finds out she is also an agent of Asgard across the multiverses. So they're suspicious, like, wait, I thought there's only one agent of Asgard. So they travel back to Asgard and they see old Loki. And old Loki, Grief Loki, reveals that it's him from an alternate future. And as it turns out, and this is part of the story that I adapted, that Kevin Feige had this whole theory about how the Mind Stone was controlling Loki in 2012's Avengers. And that's exactly what's going to be happening in this show. So old Loki reveals that he was controlled by the Mind Stone. He came from a timeline where he actually won in the 2012 Avengers and turned the world into a chaotic land where he started ruling. He wants that future to happen with other versions of Loki. So he tells him, like, I want you to be evil. And this is when Loki serves as a wake-up call to Loki, where he's like, wait, he sees sort of a really sinister mirror image of himself that he, as the god of mischief, even like really hates and feels disgusted by. So he starts turning a little bit. He starts thinking, you know, I can't be like this forever. And he starts kind of getting redeemed a little bit. And this is when the TVA reaches out to him, be like, you know what, you want to join us and actually fix this and, you know, fight old Loki together? Loki agrees. And that's our turning point. And then our second half of Act 2 is really just the two versions of Loki trying to outsmart one another throughout the multiverses. Think about Batman versus Joker, where, like, you know, in Skyfall, where they're trying to outsmart each other with the villain and everything. And then in Act 3, the two Lokis each recruit an armies of multiverse Lokis in a huge battle, because Marvel loves these space battles across multiverse portals. And Loki succeeds. And maybe this is one part I'm not sure of, acquires the Sword of Truth. He thinks that the Sword of Truth can really turn him into someone who's free of the Mind Stone's control. But then he realizes that, you know, no matter what happens, you know, he's still him, and this part of Mind Stone will always be with him. So Loki really outgrows that and redeems himself in a way to become better than what the Mind Stone makes him to be and what history dictates him to be. And this is the part that I really like with the ending. So Loki in the ending uses his time traveling device to the main MCU timeline to meet Bro Thor, and giving us a really emotional reunion between the two different brothers. And Loki uses his newly acquired wisdom to encourage Thor, and that leads into Thor Love and Thunder. And my two ideas for post-credit scenes is that in the future, a time-traveling device that the Lokis have used to travel all around the multiverse gets left behind during the Act 3 battle, and Nathaniel Richards picks it up, which sets up the Kang storyline later on in the MCU. And the post-credit scene number 2 is Lady Loki arriving at an undisclosed location as they hint Norman Osborn in the Dark Avengers. So that's my bare bones story about a movie version of Agent of Asgard, with a lot of elements obviously missing from it.
I really like that we got an army of multiverse Lokis, multiple armies of multiverse Lokis battling it out in space and across the universe. That's fantastic.
And in terms of the multiverse Lokis, I was thinking we could do an inside joke by casting Harry Styles as literally just a cameo version of Loki. Because in the Loki Agent of Asgard comics, they keep saying how he looks like Harry Styles. And obviously we have Tom Hiddleston as him. So you can't have Harry Styles playing our version of Loki, but he can really play as an alternate version. The other cast ideas that I'm sure of is for old Loki. There was a rumor about it, but I agree with this rumored choice. I would love Richard E. Grant as old Loki. He is the villain scientist from Logan, and also he played the Admiral Pride from The Rise of Skywalker. I think he looks a lot like Tom Hiddleston. He has that sort of evilness to him that he brings to his characters, and I think he'd be great as the villain of this one. Lady Loki, I know that Marvel for the Loki series has already casted an actress for that, and I love that actress. But since we're in an alternate reality where the MCU is controlled by us, I'm going to go ahead and cast Rooney Mara as Lady Loki, because she really has a lot of the similar vibes as Tom Hiddleston. And I really think it's interesting casting actors who sort of look like Tom Hiddleston in different roles. I think that would be really fun.
Yeah, no, as soon as Harry actually texted me earlier about the Richard E. Grant idea, and as soon as he said that, I was like, wow, that's actually the perfect casting idea. There's literally no one else I can imagine as old Loki now.
Oh, I agree. Richard E. Grant is awesome, and I got introduced through the movie Can You Ever Forgive Me? And he was so good in that. And obviously, as a villain in Logan, he was absolutely incredible. And he does kind of look like Tom Hiddleston in a way, so I definitely think it works. And Rooney Mara can do no wrong, so I mean, she would definitely play an amazing and as an amazing like Lady Loki. So yeah, these two cast members are great.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the first part of our If I Was Kevin Feige Loki episode. Now, more episodes and more alternate versions of the Loki movie will be coming out in the future, so keep an eye out on our YouTube channel for these future episodes. In the meantime, you can support our channel by liking and subscribing, and also leave your comments down below into what alternate stories you would make up for the Loki story. That's all for today. We'll see you next time in Different Theories.